The air at the University of Lagos convocation ground was a thick, sweltering soup of humidity and ambition. It was the kind of Lagos afternoon where the sun didn't just shine, it leaned against you like a physical weight. Thousands of graduates, dressed in heavy black polyester gowns that felt like portable saunas, navigated a sea of proud parents, pure water vendors, and opportunistic photographers. Margaret stood at the center of the chaos, her mortarboard tilted slightly as she wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. She felt like a trophy on display, the physical manifestation of her mother's prayers and her own sleepless nights in the library. "Margaret, look here, smile for the camera," her mother, Cecilia, shouted over the din. Cecilia was draped in her finest George wrapper, the fabric shimmering with gold threads that caught the unforgiving light. Her head tie, or gelly, was tied so high it looked like a structural achievement. For Cecilia, this wasn't just a graduation, it was a vindication. She had spent years selling roasted plantain by the roadside to ensure Margaret didn't end up like her. Today, her daughter was a graduate of economics, a big girl in the making. The crowd suddenly parted, not because of the heat, but because of the arrival of a presence that demanded space. Uncle James stepped out of a black sedan, his white Igbada starched so stiffly it looked like it could stand up on its own. James was a man of the people, or at least, that's what his campaign posters in Ikeja claimed. He moved with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who never had to look at a price tag. "My daughter," James boomed, his voice cutting through the noise like a hot knife through butter. He pulled Margaret into a brief, scented embrace. He smelled of expensive oud and old money. "The first degree in the family. You have broken the ceiling, Margaret. You have done what your father could not live to see." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Uncle. I couldn't have finished the final year without your support." James waved his hand dismissively. "That was just the foundation. Now we build the house. Lagos is a beast, Margaret. If you walk, the city will trample you. If you take the yellow buses, the Danfos will swallow your dignity. I want you to move like the professional you are." He signaled to his driver, who stepped forward holding a small, velvet-lined box. The family members who had gathered, cousins, aunts, and Silas, James's younger brother, leaned in. Silas, in particular, watched with eyes that were narrowed into slits of calculation. James took the key fob from the box and pressed a button. A sharp beep-beep echoed across the parking lot. A few yards away, a pristine, pearl-white SUV flashed its lights. It was a masterpiece of Japanese engineering, its chrome accents gleaming under the sun. The interior, visible through the windows, was a sea of cream leather. "This is yours," James said, dropping the keys into Margaret's palm. The weight of the metal felt cold and significant. "A Toyota Highlander. It is an investment in your safety and your future. Use it to go for interviews, use it to represent this family. Do not let the dust of Lagos touch your feet." A collective gasp went up. Her mother began to sing a song of praise, dancing in circles, but Margaret caught Silas's gaze. He wasn't smiling. He was looking at the car not as a gift for his niece, but as a missed opportunity for himself. He whispered something to his eldest son, a boy who had dropped out of Polytechnic twice, and Margaret felt a sudden, inexplicable chill despite the Lagos heat. The SUV was beautiful, but as the keys dug into her skin, she realized it was a heavy crown to wear in a family that was still hungry. The following morning, the pearl-white SUV sat in the narrow, cracked driveway of their Suralere bungalow like a diamond in a coal mine. Neighbors paused as they walked to the bus stop, whispering about the governor's niece and the sudden change in Margaret's fortune. Inside the car, Margaret sat alone for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The interior was cool, smelling of factory-fresh leather and a faint hint of Uncle James's expensive cologne. For a fleeting minute, she felt invincible, as if the car was a pressurized cabin protecting her from the chaos of the Lagos streets outside. That peace was shattered by the sound of a heavy palm striking the driver's side window. "Oya, come out." Is this where you will spend the rest of your life? Silas's voice boomed, muffled by the glass but sharp with an underlying edge. Margaret climbed out, blinking against the harsh morning sun. Silas wasn't alone. He had brought an entourage, 3 distant cousins Margaret barely recognized and an elderly aunt from the village who smelled of wood smoke and dried fish. They didn't come with flowers or cards. They came with eyes that dissected every inch of the vehicle. "The living room is full, Margaret," her mother, Cecilia, whispered, appearing at the front door. Her face, which had been glowing with pride the day before, was now drawn tight with anxiety. "Your Uncle Silas has summoned a family meeting." The living room, usually a place of quiet after-work rest, had been transformed into a courtroom. Silas had taken the central armchair, the throne, usually reserved for the head of the house. The ceiling fan whirred overhead, struggling to circulate the stagnant, humid air. Margaret sat on a low wooden stool, the lowest point in the room, while her relatives loomed over her. "We have been talking," Silas began, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't look at Margaret. He looked at the wall behind her as if addressing the ancestors. "It is a great thing that James has done. But James is a politician. He lives in a world of clouds. We, however, live on the ground. Margaret, look at this house. Look at the ceiling. Do you see the watermarks from the last rain?" Margaret followed his gaze to the yellowed stains on the plaster. "I see them, Uncle." "And look at your cousin, Ibuka," Silas continued, gesturing to a sullen young man leaning against the doorframe. "He has been out of school for 2 terms because the fees are too high. Your grandmother in the village is eating 1 meal a day because the price of Gary has tripled. Yet in our driveway, there is a machine worth 10 million naira. A machine that drinks expensive fuel while your brothers drink borehole water." "Uncle James gave it to me for my work," Margaret said, her voice small but steady. "I have interviews at the bank and the oil firms. I need to look professional." Silas let out a harsh, dry laugh that sounded like sandpaper on wood. "Professional? In Lagos? You can take a bus like everyone else. Are you better than the millions of graduates trekking every day? This car is not a gift, it is a test. God has sent this car to see if our daughter has a heart, or if she has become westernized by that university." The elderly aunt chimed in, her voice a high-pitched wail. "My daughter, when your father was sick, did we not contribute the little we had? When you were small, did I not send yams from the farms so you wouldn't starve? Now you have arrived, and you want to drive a palace on wheels while we are in the gutter." The guilt was a physical weight, more suffocating than the heat. Every word was a needle, stitching a garment of shame that Silas was forcing Margaret to wear. They weren't asking for help, they were demanding a sacrifice. They spoke of black tax, not as a burden, but as a sacred tithe. Silas watched Margaret's face closely, waiting for the moment her resolve would crack. He knew that in this culture, the individual was nothing without the approval of the collective, and he was currently holding her reputation hostage. The following Monday was supposed to be the beginning of Margaret's new life. She had secured an interview with a top-tier investment firm on Victoria Island, a feat that felt like winning the lottery in a city where thousands of resumes went to die in unread inboxes. She woke up at 5 a.m., her heart hammering against her ribs. She spent an hour ironing her only charcoal gray suit, using a charcoal iron because the local power grid had failed again. The smell of scorched cotton and starch filled the small room, a scent she usually associated with the desperate dignity of the Nigerian middle class. As she stepped into the yard, clutching her leather portfolio, the pearl-white SUV greeted her like a silent ally. But the gate wasn't clear. Silas was already there, stripped to his waist, performing his morning ablutions with a plastic bucket of water. He splashed his face, the water darkening the dry earth, and stared at Margaret through the rising steam of the humid morning. "You look like a white woman," Silas remarked, his eyes traveling from her polished heels to her neatly pinned hair. Going to 6 to sit in an air-conditioned office while your own mother is in the kitchen coughing from the smoke of the kerosene stove? Tell me, Margaret, does the bank pay in blood or in naira? I'm going to earn a living so I can buy her a gas cooker, Uncle, Margaret replied, her voice trembling as she reached for the car door. Please move the bucket. I don't want to be late. The third mainland bridge is a graveyard of time if you don't cross it by 6. Silas didn't move. He leaned against the hood of the SUV, his damp skin leaving a smudge on the pristine white paint. Ambition is a beautiful thing until it blinds you to the graves of your ancestors. You think you are driving to an interview? You are driving away from your responsibilities. Before Margaret could retort, the silence of the morning was shattered by the shrill, rhythmic wail of a ringtone. It was her mother's phone, echoing from inside the house. It wasn't the usual cheerful Afrobeat tune. It was a frantic, piercing sound that set Margaret's teeth on edge. Seconds later, Cecilia burst onto the veranda, her wrapper loosened and her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Margaret! Silas! It's the village! It's Mama! Cecilia screamed, her hands flying to her head in the universal gesture of mourning. She collapsed onto the concrete steps, the phone clattering to the floor. Margaret sprinted to her mother, her interview forgotten. What happened? Is she okay? Silas was already there, picking up the phone with a practiced calm that Margaret was too distraught to notice. He spoke in rapid-fire Igbo, his face hardening into a mask of grim determination. He grunted, nodded, and finally ended the call. He looked at the two women, his expression heavy with the weight of a death sentence. She fell in the farm, Silas whispered, his voice cracking perfectly. Internal bleeding. They took her to the teaching hospital in Enugu. They say she needs surgery immediately, a cranial decompression. If we don't deposit 3 million naira by noon, they will move her to the mortuary instead of the theater. 3 million? Cecilia wailed, clutching Margaret's knees. Where will we find that kind of money? James is in Abuja for the Senate retreat. He won't answer his private line for days. My mother is dying because we are poor. Silas turned his gaze toward the SUV, the sun finally hitting the chrome trim and sending a blinding flash of light into Margaret's eyes. We aren't poor, Cecilia. We are just stubborn. We have a golden idol sitting in our driveway while our mother's blood is pooling in her brain. Margaret felt the trap snap shut around her. The logic was a suffocating shroud. If she drove to her interview, she was a murderer. If she kept the car, she was the selfish graduate who valued leather seats over her grandmother's life. Silas stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. I have a friend, Silas said softly, his voice now a comforting, poisonous velvet. He deals in used cars. He can have the cash here in 2 hours. He won't give the full price, but he will give enough to save Mama. Margaret, the keys. Do you want to wear a suit to a funeral, or do you want to save a life? The portfolio slipped from Margaret's hand, the resumes fluttering into the mud. The dream of the high-rise office in 6 evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a sacrifice she hadn't signed up for but couldn't refuse. By 10 a.m., the promised savior arrived in a cloud of exhaust and gravel. He didn't look like a businessman who specialized in emergencies. He looked like a man who thrived on other people's desperation. Alhaji Bawa was a man of indeterminate age, with skin like cured tobacco and a smile that never reached his small, predatory eyes. He arrived in a battered yellow Mercedes that groaned under its own weight, stopping just inches from the ivory beast James had gifted Margaret. This is the one? Bawa asked, not bothering to greet Margaret. He walked around the SUV, kicking the tires with a heavy boot and running a grease-stained thumb along the door handle. It's brand new, Bawa. You can see the nylon is still on the back seats, Silas said, stepping forward with a toothy grin. He acted like a proud salesman, completely disregarding Margaret, who stood by the veranda pillar, her arms wrapped around her chest as if she were trying to hold her internal organs together. Brand new is trouble, Bawa grunted, spitting a stream of red cola nut juice onto the dry earth. In this Lagos, a car without a history is a car with a target. The police will stop her at every checkpoint. The registration isn't even fully processed. I am taking a big risk here, Silas. A very big risk. Margaret found her voice, though it sounded thin and ghostly. The papers are all there. My uncle bought it from the authorized dealer. It's worth over 12 million naira. Bawa finally looked at her, his expression one of amused pity. Young lady, 12 million is for people who have time to wait for a buyer who likes the color white. You have 2 hours before your grandmother becomes a memory. In this market, cash is a heavy burden. I can give you 4 million. Take it or leave it. 4 million. Margaret gasped. That's a third of the value. Uncle Silas, tell him. That isn't enough. Silas pulled her aside, his grip on her elbow uncomfortably firm. Margaret, listen to me. Do you hear the clock? Every minute you haggle, Mama's heart is struggling. 4 million will pay the surgery, the hospital bed, and the recovery drugs. Do you want to be the richest girl in the mortuary, or the girl who saved her family? Sign the papers. Now. The paperwork was a blur of carbon copies and illegible signatures. Margaret's hand shook so violently she nearly tore the transfer form. As she handed over the spare keys and the remote fob, she felt a physical tear in her spirit. Bawa didn't waste time. He signaled to an associate who had been waiting in the Mercedes. The man hopped into Margaret's SUV, adjusted the seat, the cream leather crinkling under his rough jeans, and roared the engine to life. The sound of the car reversing out of the driveway was the loudest noise Margaret had ever heard. It was the sound of her independence being towed away. As the white vehicle vanished around the corner of the street, the driveway suddenly felt cavernous and derelict. Bawa tossed a heavy, stained duffel bag onto the porch. It landed with a dull thud. 4.5. I gave you a bonus because I like your uncle, he lied before climbing back into his old Mercedes and rattling away. Silas was on the bag before the dust had settled. He zipped it open, his eyes widening at the sight of the banded stacks of 1,000 naira notes. The scent of old, circulated money, musty, metallic, and dirty, filled the air. I will head to the motor park immediately, Silas said, already hauling the bag toward his own car. The banks are too slow for this. I'll send the money through a contact in Enugu who can get it to the hospital in minutes. Cecilia, go and pack some clothes. You might need to go to the village to nurse her. Margaret watched them move with a frantic, renewed energy. Her mother was weeping tears of relief, praying to a God she believed had provided a way. No one looked at Margaret. No one thanked her. No one acknowledged that she had just traded her entire career trajectory for a bag of cash. She looked down at her charcoal gray suit, now smudged with dust and sweat. Her watch told her it was 11:30 a.m. The interview on Victoria Island was over. The position would be filled by someone who had a car, or someone who wasn't burdened by the blood debts of a sprawling, demanding family. She sat on the concrete step, the heat of the midday sun beginning to bake the Lagos pavement, and realized for the first time that she was completely, utterly alone in her sacrifice. 2 weeks after the white SUV vanished from the driveway, the world had shrunk for Margaret. The expansive dreams of a corporate career on the island had been replaced by the grueling, rhythmic torture of the Lagos public transport system. Her day now began at 4:30 a.m., not with the turn of a key, but with the jarring, metallic rattle of the alarm clock. She would stumble out into the pre-dawn darkness, the air already thick with the smell of burning refuse and the distant, rhythmic thumping of generators. To get to the few entry-level interviews she could still secure, Margaret had to navigate the Danfo hierarchy. The yellow Volkswagen buses were rolling coffins, their chassis held together by rust, prayers, and the sheer willpower of the conductors. She would stand at the edge of the Oshodi Expressway, her resume held tightly in a plastic folder to protect it from the oily mist of the morning, fighting off hundreds of other commuters for a seat on a wooden plank. One Tuesday, While she was squeezed between a woman selling smoked fish and a mechanic whose overalls were a map of grease stains, Margaret felt the full weight of her black tax. Her charcoal gray suit, once her pride, was now permanently creased at the elbows and knees. The Lagos heat had baked the grime into the fabric, and no amount of local soap could restore its original sheen. She looked out the window as a white SUV, identical to the one she had lost, glided past the bus in the fast lane. The driver was a young woman about her age, listening to music, her windows rolled up against the noise and the heat. Margaret felt a surge of nausea that had nothing to do with the bus's exhaust fumes. When she returned home that evening, her feet were swollen, the straps of her heels having dug deep, angry red lines into her skin. She found Silas sitting on the veranda, fanning himself with a newspaper. Beside him was a new, shiny generator, a silent, expensive model that hummed with the arrogance of brand-new machinery. "Uncle Silas," Margaret said, her voice raspy from the dust of the road. "How is Mama? You said she was moved to a private ward last week. Can I speak to her? The village phone has been switched off." Silas didn't look up from his paper. "She is sleeping, Margaret. The doctors say the recovery is slow. The brain is not like a bicycle. You don't just fix it and ride. And don't bother the village people. They are busy tending the farm now that the rains are coming." "I need to ask for a small favor," Margaret continued, swallowing her pride. It felt like swallowing dry sand. "The transport to these interviews is costing me 3,000 naira a day. I've used up the last of my graduation gift money. Since there was some change left over from the 4 million naira after the surgery deposit, could I get 20,000 for my transport this month?" Silas finally looked at her, his expression shifting from boredom to a sharp, jagged contempt. He tapped the new generator with his foot. 20,000? Do you think money grows on the leaves of the Irako tree? Do you see this, Jen? It was bought to make sure your mother can sleep with a fan because her blood pressure is high. We are spending to keep this family alive, and you are here talking about transport for interviews you never pass." "But it was my car, Uncle," Margaret whispered, her eyes stinging. "I gave it so everyone could be okay. I just need a way to get a job so I can bring in more money." "You gave it to the family, Margaret. It is no longer yours," Silas snapped, standing up and towering over her. "When you give to the ancestors, do you go back to the shrine to ask for change? You are starting to sound ungrateful. Your mother is inside eating jollof rice with chicken because of the sacrifice we made. Go and eat and be silent. Your pride is becoming a burden to this house." Margaret walked past him into the kitchen. There was no chicken. There was only a pot of watery beans and a mother who wouldn't meet her eyes. Cecilia was busy folding a stack of new wrappers, expensive Lisco prints that hadn't been there a week ago. "Mama, where did those come from?" Margaret asked, gesturing to the vibrant fabrics. "Silas said we must look decent for when the village people come to visit," Cecilia said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said James must not see us looking like beggars when he returns from Abuja." "Margaret, don't be angry. Your uncle knows best. He is the one carrying the weight of this family now." Margaret realized then that the 4 million naira wasn't just paying for a surgery. It was fueling a lifestyle of silent theft. The black tax wasn't a communal safety net. It was a leech, and she was the host. She sat in the dark corner of the kitchen, listening to the expensive hum of the new generator, and realized that her sacrifice hadn't saved her family, it had only fed the vultures. The sun was setting over Suralere, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, when Margaret turned the corner toward her family's gate. Her body felt like a collection of rusted hinges. The commute from a recruitment agency in Lekki had taken 4 hours, a grueling odyssey of 3 different buses and a harrowing ride on the back of an Okada through a cloud of stinging exhaust. Her once polished heels were now scuffed beyond repair, the leather peeling back like dead skin. As she approached the house, the familiar, arrogant hum of the new generator vibrated through the humid air, a constant reminder of the wealth she had provided but was forbidden to touch. She stopped at the gate, her heart stuttering. The veranda wasn't empty. Stacked neatly near the front door were 4 large black industrial trash bags. They were tied at the top with aggressive knots, their bulges revealing the unmistakable shapes of her belongings, the edges of her textbooks, the silhouette of her graduation gown, and the protruding heels of her spare shoes. Silas was sitting on the low wall of the porch, paring his fingernails with a small pocket knife. He didn't look up as she approached, but his presence seemed to expand, filling the space with a cold, predatory energy. "Uncle Silas? What is this?" Margaret asked, her voice cracking. She dropped her portfolio into the dust, her fingers trembling as she pointed at the bags. "Why are my things outside?" Silas closed the knife with a sharp clack. He looked at her then, his eyes devoid of the fake sympathy he had used to swindle her out of the car. "Lagos is a city for the productive, Margaret. A house is a place for those who contribute to the pot, not just those who dip their long spoons into it. We have waited for you to find your feet, but it seems your feet prefer to wander the streets without bringing anything back. I am looking for work every day." Margaret cried, the unfairness of it rising in her throat like bile. "I gave you the car. 4 million naira went into your hands. How can you say I haven't contributed?" Silas stood up, stepping off the porch to tower over her. He smelled of expensive snuff and the fried fish he'd clearly just enjoyed. The car was a sacrifice for the ancestors and for Mama's life. "Do you now want to charge the family interest on a gift of mercy? That money is gone, Margaret. It went into the hospital, into the medicines, and into keeping this roof over your mother's head. But the roof is tired. Your cousin Peter is coming from the village on Friday to start his apprenticeship. He needs your room. He is a man. He will bring progress. You are just a beautiful liability." "Mama!" Margaret screamed, pushing past him toward the front door. "Mama, tell him he can't do this." Cecilia appeared in the doorway, but she didn't step out onto the veranda. She stayed in the shadows, her face partially obscured by a new, vibrant head tie. She looked at Margaret with a mixture of pity and a terrifying, submissive cowardice. "Margaret, my daughter, listen to your uncle," Cecilia whispered, her voice barely audible over the generator's drone. "He says your spirit is currently heavy. He says that ever since that car arrived, you have brought a shadow into this house. He thinks if you go out into the world and struggle a bit, your star will shine again. It is for your own good." "For my own good?" Margaret's laugh was jagged, bordering on hysteria. "You are throwing me onto the streets in the middle of the rainy season for my own good? Mama, look at me. I am your daughter." "You were James's favorite," Silas interrupted, his voice hardening into a blade. "But James is not here. I am the head of this house. I have consulted the elders, and we agree. You have become too city-proud. You think because you have a degree, we owe you a bed. Go and show the world that degree. See if it will boil yam for you tonight." He stepped forward and kicked the nearest black bag off the veranda. It rolled into the dirt, the plastic tearing slightly to reveal the silk of her graduation sash, the one that read Class of 2025 in bold, gold letters. "Take your things, Margaret," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "If you are still here when the sun goes down, I will call the neighborhood vigilantes and tell them a stranger is trespassing. Don't make me disgrace you further. Go and find where your high-class life will take you." Margaret looked at her mother one last time, hoping for a spark of rebellion, a hint of the woman who had once sold plantain to keep her in school. But Cecilia only turned away, retreating into the brightly lit house that Margaret's sacrifice had furnished. The door clicked shut, and the bolt slid home with a finality that echoed in the pit of Margaret's stomach. She stood alone in the darkening yard, the heavy bags of her life scattered at her feet, as the first few drops of a tropical downpour began to crater the dust around her. The rain didn't just fall, it interrogated. Each drop felt like a cold, wet needle piercing the thin fabric of Margaret's blouse as she dragged the 4 heavy black bags across the flooded gutter. The weight was uneven, pulling at her shoulder sockets until the joints screamed in protest. She moved with a desperate, frantic energy, trying to keep her leather portfolio, the last container of her academic identity, tucked firmly under her arm. The Lagos night had transformed the familiar streets of Surulere into a treacherous landscape of hidden potholes and slick, oily mud. She stood at a bus stop under a flickering streetlight, her breath hitching in her chest. She pulled out her phone, the screen cracked but still glowing with a ghostly light. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name, Titi. They had been roommates for 4 years, sharing noodles and dreams of a corporate future. Titi had been the first person Margaret had taken for a ride in the white SUV, the two of them screaming with joy as the AC blasted away the Lagos heat. The phone rang 3 times before Titi's voice filtered through the static. "Hello? Margaret? Why are you calling so late? The network is terrible." "I'm outside. My uncle, he threw me out. I have nowhere to go. Can I just stay on your sofa for a few days? Just until I find a lead." There was a long, chilling pause. The sound of a television and laughter echoed in the background of Titi's apartment. "Margaret, I'm so sorry, but my boyfriend is staying over for the next 2 weeks. There's really no space. And honestly, I heard what happened with the car. People are saying you were reckless, that you offended your family. I can't get involved in family palaver, you know? It's bad luck." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the black screen, a cold realization washing over her that was far more frigid than the rain. Her social currency had been the car. Without the ivory beast, she wasn't this successful graduate. She was a liability, a cautionary tale that people didn't want to touch for fear of catching her misfortune. With no other options, she spent her last few hundred naira on a bus to Ikeja. She chose the area near the computer village because it was a place of frantic, anonymous movement. A city of ghosts and gadgets where no one looked at a face for more than a second. By midnight, the shutters of the electronics shops had slammed shut and the area boys had claimed the street corners. Margaret found herself in a narrow alleyway behind a row of industrial dumpsters. The stench was a physical blow, a nauseating cocktail of rotting fruit, battery acid, and stagnant sewage. But the dumpsters offered a meager shield against the wind. She dragged her bags into the shadows, stacking them to create a makeshift wall. She reached into the largest bag and pulled out her graduation gown. The black silk, once a symbol of her highest achievement, was now her only defense against the elements. She wrapped it around her shivering frame, the gold embroidery of the school crest pressing against her cheek. As she curled into a ball on a discarded piece of cardboard, she watched a large rat scurry across a heap of discarded circuit boards. "I am an economist," she whispered to the darkness, her voice trembling. "I have a second-class upper degree." But the alley didn't care about her grades. The city didn't care about her black tax sacrifice. She was no longer Margaret the graduate. She was a silhouette in the corner of a dirty Ikeja street, invisible to the world that had promised her everything and given her nothing. She closed her eyes, the rhythmic dripping of the rain on the metal dumpster sounding like the slow, steady ticking of a life running out of time. The sun didn't rise in the Ikeja computer village. It simply ignited the smog. By 6 a.m., the silence of the alleyway was obliterated by the frantic symphony of 1,000 generators coughing to life. Margaret woke not to the comfort of a bed, but to the sharp, rhythmic vibration of a metal shutter being cranked open just feet from her head. The air was a toxic haze of ozone and burnt diesel. She sat up, her spine popping in several places, and tried to untangle her limbs from the damp silk of her graduation gown. Her first priority was the illusion of dignity. She reached into her torn plastic bag and pulled out a sachet of pure water she had scavenged the night before. With the precision of a surgeon, she bit a tiny hole in the corner of the plastic film and let the lukewarm liquid trickle over her face, rubbing away the grime of the gutter. She used the hem of her gown to dry her skin, her reflection in a discarded computer monitor revealing a woman she barely recognized. Her eyes were sunken, two dark pits of exhaustion, and her hair, once braided into neat cornrows, was now a tangled thicket of dust and dried leaves. "You are wasting water, fine girl," a voice raspy as a rusted file called out from the mouth of the alley. Margaret froze. A man stood there, leaning against a stack of empty motherboard boxes. He was dressed in a tattered yellow vest, the unofficial uniform of the local agboros, the street touts who controlled the flow of the city. He held a half-eaten cob of roasted corn, and his eyes, yellowed by years of cheap gin and hard sun, were fixed on her black trash bags. "I'm just cleaning up," Margaret said, her voice sounding thin and foreign to her own ears. "I'm leaving now." "Leaving to go where?" the man asked, stepping into the shadows. He chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "You think this space behind the dumpster is free? This is prime real estate. People pay to sleep here. You have been here for 3 nights, and I haven't seen a single naira from your hand." "I don't have any money," Margaret replied, clutching her leather portfolio to her chest like a shield. "I gave everything to my family." The man spat a kernel of corn into the mud. "Family is for people who live in houses. Out here, the only family you have is the one you pay. My name is Monday, and I am the landlord of this gutter. If you want to keep those bags, you must pay the security fee. Or maybe," he paused, his gaze lingering on her ruined charcoal gray suit, "you have something in those bags worth selling. Don't touch them." Margaret snapped, a flicker of her old fire returning. "These are my clothes, my books, my life." Monday took a step closer, the smell of fermented palm wine radiating from him. "Your life is rubbish, girl. Look at you. You are a graduate? I see those papers sticking out of your bag. In this place, we use those papers to wrap suya. Give me 500 naira for the night, or I will call the boys to come and do a proper inventory of your things." Margaret felt a cold knot of terror in her stomach. She reached into her hidden pocket, her fingers brushing against her last 200 naira, money she had been saving for a piece of bread. She pulled it out and held it toward him, her hand shaking. "This is all I have. Please. I'm waiting for my uncle. He's a politician. When he finds me, I'll make sure you are rewarded." Monday snatched the notes, crumpled them, and shoved them into his pocket. He looked at her with a sudden, unsettling flash of pity. "Your uncle? Fine girl, politicians only remember people who can vote. You don't even have an address. You are a ghost, and ghosts don't have uncles." He turned and swaggered out of the alley, leaving Margaret in a silence that felt heavier than the noise. She looked down at her portfolio. The humidity had begun to warp the edges of her degree certificate, the ink of her name starting to bleed into the parchment. The miracle she was waiting for, the sudden arrival of Uncle James's motorcade, felt further away than ever. She realized then that the street had its own black tax, a daily tithe of dignity and survival that left no room for hope. She sat back down on her cardboard mat, the heat of the Lagos morning beginning to bake the alley, and wondered how many sachets of water it would take to wash away the feeling of being a ghost. The sky over Ikeja didn't just break, it shattered. A sudden, violent tropical downpour transformed the computer village from a buzzing hive of commerce into a chaotic, drowning labyrinth. Within minutes, the gutters overflowed, sending a tide of plastic bottles and gray sludge swirling into the alleyway where Margaret huddled. She pressed herself against the cold, rusted metal of the dumpster, her graduation gown, now a sodden, gray rag, wrapped tightly around her shivering shoulders. The rain was so loud it muffled the sounds of the city, creating a private, watery prison of sound. Through the curtain of the deluge, a rhythmic flashing of blue and red lights began to pulse against the brick walls of the alley. It was followed by the sharp, authoritative whoop-whoop of a police siren. This was not the sound of the local patrol. This was the sound of a motorcade. Two black, armored SUVs with tinted windows turned the corner, their massive tires churning through the muddy floodwater with arrogant ease. They came to a halt just yards from the mouth of the alley, blocking the path of the frustrated yellow buses. A back door opened. A man stepped out, shielded by a large, golf-sized umbrella held by a frantic security detail. He was dressed in a deep charcoal agbada, the embroidery glinting even in the dim afternoon light. It was Uncle James. He was in the area for a commissioning ceremony at the local government secretariat, and his driver had taken a shortcut to avoid the flash flood on the main road. James paused, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the edge of the muck. He wasn't looking for anyone. He was merely waiting for his security to clear a path. But then his eyes caught a flicker of something familiar, a black silk fabric with a distinct gold crest, now half submerged in a pile of refuse behind a dumpster. "Wait," James commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the roar of the rain. He walked toward the shadows, his security team scrambling to keep the umbrella over his head. He stopped 3 feet from the trash pile. He saw a woman whose skin had turned a sallow, ashen gray, her hair matted with the debris of the street. She looked like a ghost that had crawled out of the Lagos soil. When she looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and agonizing shame, James felt a cold, sharp blade of ice pierce his chest. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, pushing the umbrella aside, allowing the rain to drench his expensive clothes. "My God, Margaret, is that you?" He reached down, his hands trembling as he gripped her thin shoulders. As he pulled her into the light, the full extent of her degradation hit him. She smelled of the gutter, of despair, and of weeks of unwashed sorrow. The woman he had seen as the future of their bloodline was now a broken figure in an alleyway. "Uncle James," she choked out, her voice a jagged rasp. She tried to pull away, to hide her face in the ruins of her gown. "Please, don't look at me. Go away." James's shock quickly curdled into a dark, vibrating fury. He looked at the dumpsters, then back at her gaunt face. His mind, trained by years of political maneuvering, immediately jumped to the most cynical conclusion. "What is this?" he roared, the veins on his neck bulging. "I gave you everything. I gave you a degree, a name, and a vehicle that cost more than some people earn in a lifetime. I bought you that car so you would never have to touch this mud." He shook her, his voice rising over the thunder. "Where is the car, Margaret? Where is the SUV? Did you sell it to fund this madness? Did you waste my investment on a lifestyle of drugs or men that ended you here? Answer me. Where is the car I bought you?" Margaret collapsed against his chest, her sobs finally breaking through the wall of her pride. The rain washed away the tears as fast as they fell, but the weight of her secret was finally too heavy to hold. She grabbed the fabric of his agbada with her claw-like fingers, her body shaking with a violent, rhythmic tremor. "I never even got to drive it to the first interview, Uncle," she wailed, her voice a piercing lament that stopped the security guards in their tracks. "They took it. Silas and the others, they used Mama's life to take the keys from my hand." James froze, the name of his younger brother acting like a cooling agent on his rage. He looked into her eyes, seeing not the rebellion of a wayward youth, but the hollowed-out trauma of a victim. "Silas? What does Silas have to do with my car?" The rain continued to hammer against the armored roof of the lead SUV, sounding like 1,000 frantic fingers trying to claw their way inside. Within the climate-controlled sanctuary of the vehicle, the air was silent and smelled of expensive leather and ozone, a brutal contrast to the stench of the alley Margaret had just been pulled from. She sat on the edge of the plush seat, a thermal blanket draped over her shivering frame, her hands still clutching the warped leather portfolio. Uncle James sat opposite her, his face a mask of such terrifying stillness that even his seasoned security detail refused to make eye contact. "Tell me everything, Margaret," James commanded, his voice a low, vibrating hum. "Do not leave out a single name. Do not skip a single cent. Margaret looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw a stranger, a woman whose youth had been taxed into extinction. "It started the day after you left for Abuja," she began, her voice gaining a sharp, clinical edge as she recounted the trauma. "Uncle Silas didn't wait for the engine to cool. He brought the elders. He brought Auntie Ifioma. They sat in the parlor and told me that my success was a communal harvest. They called me modern and selfish every time I reached for the keys. But I held on. I held on until the night the phone rang." She described the midnight ambush, Silas's manufactured panic, the lie about her grandmother's heart failing, and the blood debt he claimed she owed for her education. "He told me Mama would die in the hospital hallway because I wanted to drive a car. He brought a man named Alhaji Bawa at 2 a.m. They sold the SUV for 4 million naira in the dark, uncle. 4 million for a 12 million naira machine. Silas took the bag of cash. He told me he was sending it to Enugu for the surgery." James leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle of his walking stick. "And your mother?" Cecilia saw this happen. "She watched," Margaret whispered, a fresh tear carving a path through the grime on her cheek. "She watched because Silas told her I was cleansing my spirit by giving. When the money was gone, Silas bought a new generator. He bought Vlisco wrappers for Mama to keep her quiet. And when I asked for transport fare to go for interviews, he told me I was a liability. He threw my things into the dirt and told the neighbors I had become a prostitute and a drug addict to explain why I was gone. He told you I moved to Abuja so you wouldn't come looking for the asset he had already liquidated." The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of an impending storm. James didn't shout. He didn't erupt. Instead, he pulled out his encrypted mobile phone and dialed a number. "Chief Superintendent," James said into the receiver, his eyes locked on Margaret. "I'm sending you a location in Surulere. I want Silas and everyone in that house detained. Not for questioning, for an inventory. Every new item, every kobo in their accounts. I want the man called Bawa tracked. And tell the boys in Enugu to check the teaching hospital. If my mother was never there, I want Silas charged with criminal conspiracy and kidnapping." He ended the call and looked at Margaret. "I bought you that car to be your wings, Margaret. I didn't realize I was putting a target on your back for the people who were supposed to be your shield." "It's the black tax, uncle," Margaret said, the words feeling like shards of glass. "It's not a contribution, it's a ransom. They don't want us to fly, they want us to carry them until our wings break." As the motorcade pulled away from the slums of Ikeja, Margaret felt the first hint of warmth returning to her limbs. The golden girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew the true cost of family loyalty. Justice was coming, swift and cold as the Lagos rain, but as she looked at her ruined graduation gown in the trash bag at her feet, she knew that some debts could never be repaid, and some betrayals could never be washed clean. The car was gone, but for the first time in months, the road ahead was finally clear.
Thank you for watching today's video, guys. Kindly hit the like button, like today's video, and also subscribe to this channel. Also, let me know which country you are watching this story from. I'd really love to know. And I'm glad that you watched this video to the end. Kindly also let me know what you've learned in this story and what you think about this particular story. I'd love to see you in my next video, guys. Bye.